I'm Rachel Smolker. I'm co-director of Biofuelwatch. Biofuelwatch works to raise awareness and campaign against the impacts of large-scale bioenergy, which includes liquid biofuels like ethanol and biodiesel, but also burning wood, burning trees for energy. And in particular, we were based in the U.S. and we're also based in the U.K.
Okay, so you're an international organization. What's wrong with biofuels?
Well, biofuels have a huge land area footprint compared to fossil fuels. You know, you can drill a hole and get some oil out, which is not to say that that's a good thing to do, but the impacts of biofuels have to do with the land area that is required in order to, get any energy. So, in the example of wood biomass, which is one of the major focus for our work, it takes a huge amount of wood to make a small amount of energy, and that has huge impacts on forests. So it's basically the land area and the impacts on biodiversity and also on human rights, because people live on the land and are impacted.
Do you see it as an either or? Fossil fuels, there's a lot of problem with climate change with fossil fuels. So bio sounds good. What's the solution?
Right. Well, people often, biofuels were put forward as a solution to climate change, as an alternative form of energy. But they're a false solution. First of all, most of them have been shown to actually result in more carbon emissions than the fossil fuels that they replace. And because of the many other impacts, the bottom line is our problem with climate change is not just a problem of which flavor of energy we're using. It's a deeper, more systemic problem that we have about consumption and energy use and our relationship to the natural world and to each other. It's a much bigger problem than just changing the flavor of our energy use. One thing a lot of people don't realize is that when we're talking about renewable energy, so we see people getting out and protesting about we need to do something about climate change, and you'll often see people say 100% renewable energy now, right? And what many people don't realize is that our renewable energy mix is actually not as lovely as we might imagine. About half of what is classed as renewable energy is bioenergy in different forms, either corn ethanol. In the US, we put about 40% of our corn crop, including genetically engineered corn varieties specifically for ethanol production, into making ethanol. And in Europe as well, it's over 50% of what's classed as renewable energy. And these companies get huge subsidies. For example, the Drax power facility in the UK, which is burning wood pellets. In the southeastern United States, these energy companies are pelletizing the forests in the southeast, turning them into wood pellets, and communities are suffering the consequences of those wood pellet manufacturing. And then they're being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean and burned in coal facilities like Drax in the UK. And Drax gets credit for producing renewable energy. So does that sound like a common sense climate solution, to cut down the forest, turn them into pellets, ship them across the ocean and burn them in a coal plant? The other point about this is that this coal plant probably would have had to shut down because of the regulations on sulfur emissions. So because biomass does actually result in less sulfur emissions, although there are more of other types of emissions, it has prolonged the life of that coal plant. So there's a synergy that's happening between the fossil fuels and the biofuels world that many people, I guess, aren't quite recognizing. So that holding up that 100% renewable energy banner, and look at the other part of the mix of that renewable energy, right? We've got about 25%, 20% or so is big hydro. And big hydro, talk to the people in Labrador at Muskrat Falls who are dealing with the consequences of this horrendous dam that's been put and is going to poison their traditional food shed with mercury as a result of the dam, and is also threatening the livelihoods of communities because this construction of it is so dangerous and shoddy. So that's another 20-something% of our renewable energy mix. And then, wind has been taking off, but many people would say that, there are a lot of problems with wind as well, where it's sited, who owns it, who profits from it, who uses the energy, the manufacturing of the materials that go into it, the impacts on wildlife, etc. And then somewhere up there in a tiny, tiny little sliver at the very top is solar energy, which actually in the bigger picture is still contributing a very small percentage of our renewable energy. So, it's a much bigger question than changing the flavor of energy that we use.
You're a doctor of, are you a biologist?
Yes.
That gives you some authority when it comes to speaking of things of scientific nature. Academia overall, what do you think about the role of a scientist when it comes to puzzling out the problems of the planet, and the role of academia to activism, and the role of academia to capital or business? Could you discuss that a little?
Sure, yeah. I have a PhD in biology from the University of Michigan, and I grew up in an academic family. My father was an academic, and he was also one of the founders of the Environmental Defense Fund. So, I come from a background of sort of bridging that academics and activism. And back when it was founded, when my dad was involved, the Environmental Defense Fund was a pretty cool organization, and I would not, I have to remind myself and others of the fact that it wasn't always the way it is now, which is basically a business, it's a corporation. But, academics is, the thing about academics is that people look to academics for what they consider to be the objective truth, and the scientific method is a beautiful tool that we have, and I believe in its value. But the system of academia has also, the universities have also turned into essentially corporations, and the people doing research in the life sciences, where I am most familiar with, they have to bring in big grants, and they bring in their big grants from those who have money, which is the corporations that, take the example of Bayer was Monsanto, or other entities that may be less directly controlled by those corporations. But the corporate control of the money that is behind the obligatory grants that people in academia are required, puts them into a relationship with those funders that means that they can no longer really be considered objective. They are now becoming tools of, and the other thing is that I would say is that industry has recognized the value of controlling and owning academics, and of having a peer-reviewed study that says what they want to have said. And so, it's becoming increasingly frustrating to look to the peer-reviewed literature for objective truth at this point. And that's a very dangerous place. It's very analogous in some ways to what we see, say, Donald Trump doing, where he obfuscates the boundary between truth and falsity. And that is a place of very insecure footing for people that is, I think, very insidious and dangerous. So academia has unfortunately been, in many domains, kind of usurped by the corporate world, and that's really a problem. I see that a lot in the research that's done on bioenergy all these different technologies for engineering microbes to turn out fuels, or genetically engineering trees so that they'll be more easily refined and turned into biofuels and so on. There's a world of academics who are doing that kind of research, and they're funded by corporate interests, and they just parrot out what they know their funders want to hear, which is also the case with a lot of the big NGOs that work in the environmental world, right? Back to the Environmental Defense Fund. They parrot out what their corporate owners want to hear.
You're a scientist. You're concerned about nature. What draws you to nature? I mean, you're working on not only biofuels, but you're also working on genetic engineered trees, I think I heard you say. So why? What's the draw to nature? Isn't there better life through chemistry? I mean, I can. There's so many things that technology has given us. Why not just mess around a little bit with a gene to make a better plant?
I think it's, partly spiritual and partly intellectual belief that this beautiful gift of nature that we have on this planet has a history, and maybe it started with some microbe that landed on shed off a comet. Who knows where it came from, but it has a long history of evolution on this little ball of dirt floating through the space. And that is our common heritage. And it is something that we all need to value. And whatever random things may have happened along the way, that's all part of our story of life here. And that is our story, and I value that story, and I value the history of that story. And what I really object to and resent is a corporation that wants to make profiting off of biofuels or whatever, coming in and saying, we're going to redesign the whole code of life and create new organisms, new to nature organisms, and manipulate these organisms to, produce or secrete or be more suitable to making fuels and energy that we can make profits from. That is not their right. This is our common heritage, this history, and this that we have, which is, it is a beautiful gift, and it is not theirs to decide what to do with it and to profit off of it.
Thank you so much.
You are very welcome.